I'm a 19-year-old female living in the Pacific Northwest. A couple of months ago, I was looking for extra work because my hours at my regular job were shit. I'm quite anxious and don't have any friends, so I turned to Craigslist. I knew the site could be sketchy, but I was desperate for side gigs, and I hadn't had any luck as someone with no skills and not willing to do sex work. One ad caught my attention. It offered $50 for someone to take photos of a property using either a camera or something above an iPhone 12, promising it would only take an hour or two. I emailed the poster and soon got a text back. The man said I seemed like the perfect fit and invited me over that same day. The house was about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by dense forest. It was small and run down, but nothing that raised alarms. The man who greeted me looked like he was in his 50s, unremarkable. He invited me inside. The house was completely empty. No furniture, just dust and dirt. I asked where to start taking photos, but he was dodging the question, making small talk and asking personal questions about me instead. My anxiety was building, so I kept the small talk going, but then he began staring at me intensely. I dropped my phone at one point when we eventually started taking photos, though, the house, and when he picked it up, he held onto it a little too long before giving it back. Unprompted, when taking photos of the master bedroom, he brushed my face with his hand and complimented my skin. I knew it was stupid coming here, but at that point my blood truly ran cold and I was done making excuses in my head. I made a quick excuse to leave something about my mom, but when I turned toward the door, he grabbed my arm. I still have the picture I took after the ordeal of the bruises on my forearm. It felt like it was going to get snapped in half. I had brought a small knife for self-defense, a gift from my paranoid mom, who would have never let me come here if she had known. Without thinking, I pulled it out and stabbed him in the arm. He let go, swinging at my arm with the knife, but I was already running out of the house. I got into my car and drove until I was at a gas station and my heart was calm. I called the police and explained everything. They took it seriously, so I came in to make a report and answer questions. They searched the property and the surrounding forest, but didn't find him. The house turned out to be abandoned, and in the basement they found a pack of zip ties. A report was made, but he's still out there. I call sometimes for updates, but it's never anything of substance. I've never told anyone about this other than the police. Not even my mom. I know I sound pretty unbothered, but that's the first time anything like that has ever happened to me, and I have trouble leaving my house most days. I decided to tell this story as a way of getting it off my chest, as it plagues my thoughts constantly. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, but he didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "Are you coming?" he asked. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought that he was older. "Yes, we're in front of the house now." He got extremely upset. "We? Oh yes, my boyfriend's with me. You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause he said, "I'm sorry. It's just, sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking. Greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're really weirded out. But this isn't enough for us to bail just yet, and as we look at each other wondering what to do, the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "What from?" my boyfriend asks. "Work" is the flat reply. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town too? I tried to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, apropos of nothing, let me show you the basement. At this point, I should have nope out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town where city folk, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs and the light didn't come on. Normally the response for this is, oh shit, the light's out, or something like that. But he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. Then he stood there without moving in the dark and said, aren't you coming down? There's nothing to see if the light's out, says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open secretly, though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge or pantry. Or utensils. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished. There was furniture up there. It would smell bad. This last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretended to go to his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople. That there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company as he claimed on Craigslist. And that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring. The house where the grad student lived. After talking to my boyfriend, I've decided to contact Craigslist and the police department with my info. The police say they'll drop by for a check-in, and I'm still waiting on confirmation from Craigslist, but at least the ad is flagged and should, hopefully, be taken down. Thank you everyone for your words. I realize that it's better to err on the side of caution and potentially save other people from harm. If the landlord is really innocent at worst, he'll be inconvenienced. I was absolutely strapped for cash. I mean, what more can I say? I had just gotten kicked out of my mother's house. Granted, I was 25 with no job. I was desperate for cash. I didn't want to be that guy working minimum wage jobs for the rest of his life. I didn't want to make enough to barely support myself. What was I to do? In hindsight, I probably should have just started there and worked my way up. Like, a normal fucking person? Well, I decided I would do some freelancing. It paid pretty good, and I could pick my own jobs. I felt pretty confident that I could make enough to start getting an actual education other than a high school diploma. What better place to look than on Craigslist? Right? No, wrong. I did it anyways, though. One night, while scrolling through the jobs section of Craigslist, I stumbled upon an ad for help tending a farm. It provided living quarters, free meals, and the best part, money. The ad was written by a man who said he had inherited a farm, but he was getting too old to tend to the animals and crops as efficiently as he once used to. The pay was extremely good, and I had a place to stay, basically rent-free. After about 2 hours of deliberation, I decided to go ahead and send him an email. I explained I only needed this temporarily, as I was saving money for school. I told him I could be a reliable worker, but only for 6 months. I didn't really expect an answer back, as he probably wanted something longer or more permanent. It only took about 15 minutes before I received a response. I sent the email at 2 a.m. I admit I was a little off-put by the speedy reply, especially since it was the middle of the night. I figured he'd be sleeping, Anyways, the email he sent was pretty short and to the point. He explained any help was good enough and said he'd be ready for my arrival the following day. He left the address and his phone number. The next morning, I packed everything I wanted to take, told my mother I was leaving for a job, and I'd stay in contact, and headed out to the farm. When I arrived, he was nothing like I had imagined. He was tall and fairly overweight. He had a beard that wasn't quite full, but still enough to be called a beard. I guess his eyes were dark, really dark. I could barely make out his pupils. Upon approaching him with my bags, he reached out to me. I dropped my bags and shook his hand. It felt forced. It wasn't a very friendly handshake. It was firm, almost gripping. He let go, and I felt my arm fall to my side. He asked me to hurry in, so I did. He quickly showed me to my room and asked if I could start right away. Flustered, I dropped my belongings in my room and threw my phone and keys on the bed. I quickly changed my pants into jeans and put on some old shoes. I walked out to the main hall. He stood there, almost mannequin-like. When we locked eyes, he started telling me my tasks. I was to tend to the field 3 times a day. He said he had plowed over the land to start anew. He was planting corn, and a lot of it. He claimed he was going to sell and distribute the corn to local grocery stores. I asked about the animals, and he said there were none. Before I could ask anything further, he cut me off and threw me a shovel. He asked me to fill in holes throughout the farm before he could till the land. I took the shovel and hurried out of the door. Staring at him was uncomfortable. I was tired. I had barely slept the night before. Hell, I had sent the email the night before. This all felt like a whirlwind, but all I thought about was the money. I knew in my gut this wasn't right, but I really needed this. The farm was huge. At the end of the field, you couldn't even see the house anymore. I know because I had to walk to the whole way through it to fill in holes. Holes I never found, by the way, until the edge of the farm. It was surrounded in thick forest. I knew it was a rural area, but I didn't realize the farm was basically a one-way in, one-way out kind of deal. The forest was dense, really dense. You'd get lost in a matter of seconds if you weren't paying attention. When I reached the very end of the farm, I noticed only one hole and about 14 other already filled in holes. Why would he send me out here, over a mile away, to fill in one hole? I felt uneasy about the whole thing. As I started to fill in the hole, which was about 10 feet deep, I couldn't stop glancing over at the already filled-in, disturbed ground. After I filled in about 2 feet worth of dirt, my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to dig into one of the already filed holes. These were not small holes. They were wide and about 12 feet in length. They were big enough to fit a deceased cow, hell, maybe even 2. I had already figured that's what the case was, considering there weren't any animals. I'm glad I went with my gut. It didn't take much digging to reach the first, weird object. It was a wallet. I picked it up and opened it, but it was completely empty. I tossed it to the side and kept digging. That's when I saw a hint of red fabric. I couldn't tell right away what it was. It could have been an animal wrapped in a blanket. It's safe to say I was heading into denial. It was only about 4 feet down when I discovered the body. Her body was in bad shape, but she wasn't decomposing. All of the trauma she went through was clear on her skin. I knelt down and felt her body. She was cold. I sat there for a couple minutes, just staring at her. Once I realized that her time of death had to be within the last 48 hours, I ran to the nearest tree and vomited. I didn't even bother filling in the hole I was supposed to, but I reburied the girl. Her body didn't deserve to be exposed like that. I threw the wallet into an entrance of the words near the graves. I figured the police would find it, even if he were to try and hide the bodies better. After that I ran. I felt like an Olympic athlete. It was starting to get dark and I had to make it back before then, or I'd be wandering around this field for hours. The last thing I wanted was to be hunted down like an animal in the pitch black. I knew that's what he was going to do. He knew filling the hole would have taken until dark. Once I reached the house, I finally stopped to catch my breath. I knew I had to remain composed, or he would know. I regulated my breathing and walked in. He was sitting at the dining table to the left of the house. I couldn't tell what he was doing, but once he heard me open the front door, his head swung around so fast I thought he'd snap his neck. He looked at me like a deer in the headlights. It was obvious he hadn't expected me back so soon. "You're done?" I could tell he was trying everything in his power to remain calm. "I got sick. I had to come back. I'll go back out to finish it. I have to use the bathroom." I tried to sound as nonchalant as I could, but I knew he could tell I was lying. After looking at me up and down, he said, "Okay then, get back to it. I want it done by tonight." I shook my head and hurried to my room. I took the clothes I had taken off when I arrived and shoved them into my suitcase. I was so happy I hadn't unpacked. I grabbed my phone, but my keys were gone. Frantic, I started looking for them as quietly as possible. He took them. I knew it. My original plan was to run in, grab my things, and book it the hell out of there, which is pretty hard to do with no keys. I sat on the bed for a moment. My phone had no signal, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I started going through my pictures. If I was gonna die, I wanted to see my friends and family one more time. Even if it was just over a phone screen, it felt like enough. That's when I stumbled upon my 23rd birthday party, when my mother had gifted me my car as a present. I stood proudly by my car with a set of keys in each hand. I had 2 sets of keys. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me earlier. I never used them, but I always carried them in case I locked myself out of my car. I unzipped my suitcase and pulled everything out of it. At the very bottom was my second set of keys. They must have been the first thing I threw in while packing. It was a mindless habit at that point, and in that moment, I couldn't have been more proud of myself. I decided to say screw the clothes and grab my phone and the keys. I peeked out of the bedroom and walked to the bathroom. It wasn't hard to act ill because I was already nauseated from sheer terror and anxiety. I tried to make over-exaggerated gagging sounds, but I eventually threw up. It wasn't my intention, but it made it more realistic. I rinsed out my mouth and stuck my phone and keys into the side of my pants. I made sure they weren't obvious and headed back out the main area. Still sitting at the dining table, I told him I was ready to finish the work. He nodded and I walked out. I started walking toward the farm again, because when I looked behind me, he was watching me through the window. I walked slow, and once he wasn't watching anymore, I fled to my car. He heard my frantic running and bolted outside. By then, I was already in my car and pulling out. He started to sprint full speed at my car, and I floored it. I heard 2 gunshots ring out, and I felt the slight impact as one of bullets shot through the passenger seat. I sped until I felt safe. It had taken me 4 hours to get there, and about 2 to get home. I immediately went to my mother's and told her everything. Turns out there were 52 bodies discovered on the farmland when I reported what had happened to the authorities. They conducted a thorough search of the whole farm. Many missing persons cases that went cold throughout the years were coming to light. The only thing they didn't find was him. I look every few months to see if they finally have a lead, but they never do. The name he had given me was fake, and the phone number was that of a burner phone. I didn't have any pictures of him. I described him to a sketch artist, and that was about it. Although I saw online that there's a farm on the West Coast. Pays well, living expenses taken care of, and free meals. It's run by some old man who says the work is just too much to handle by himself. It seems too good to be true. The similarities are eerie. I know you might need the money, but I wouldn't go if I were you.